Hello, Helen here. Thanks for joining me for the last card in my Christmas 2017 series. This card's going to be a wintry scene with a Santa sleigh in the background. I'm going to be using a square card base. I've cut it out with a stitched square die, but you don't have to do that. Just make a card base. It's about 14 centimetres or 6 inches or thereabouts. I'm going to be using some tree dies that I have here. There's two different brands, but what I'm wanting to show with this card is that you don't have to use particular brands, just what you can get hold of wherever you live or what you might already have. So some tree dies, I've got some square stitched dies. You're going to need 3 different sizes for that. I've also got some border dies, sloping borders, but just whatever you've got, or you could just cut them out with freehand with scissors, and you'll get just as lovely effect. Now I've got a combination of some stitched square dies, and I've also got one of the inside-outside dies that fit not quite nicely in between, so I'm going to be cutting out 2 frames. You really don't need the stitching necessarily, so it would look just as nice for square dies without the stitching. I'm going to cut a frame that's using the inside-outside die, which just means that it's got stitching on the outside of the cut line as well as the inside of the cut line, and I'm going to use that with the largest square die that I've got, and I'm going to cut a narrow frame, and then I'm going to cut a second one that's going to use the next size in of the stitched square dies and make a slightly deeper frame, and that's going to just show some dimension in the scene when I come to put the card together. I've now got some white glitter paper, and I'm going to cut the 2 sloping borders to make sort of like 2 snowbanks. One's going to be slightly deeper than the other, and that will be the back one, and then a slightly narrow one for the front. Now, like I said before, if you don't have any sloping borders or anything like that, really it'll just be fine to freehand cut them with scissors. It's really just to get the 2 levels of the dimension that I'm going for in the card, so it really isn't required if you don't have them. Now, while I was cutting out the snowbanks, I've cut out some of the trees as well. I've cut out 2 of this tree. This other set has 3 to it. I'm not going to use the bigger tree out of the set. I'm just using the 2 smaller ones because it's a little bit big in scale for the type of card I'm looking for. So I've cut quite a few of those and the 2 other ones, and what I'm going to do is put some chunky glitter onto the edges of the tree to make it look like snow falling on them. So I've got this Creative Expressions glitter called Ice Snow. It's available at Joanna Sheen's and other places in the UK, and I'm just using some glue with my applicator bottle, going around the parts of the tree that I want to have the glitter on, and then I'm just sprinkling the glitter on to that, and then I'm going to put those aside to dry completely. I'm going to go ahead and do the glitter on all the 3 sizes of the trees that I'm going to use, and as I said, once I've done that, I've put them aside to dry completely before I go on to the next part of the card. Now that they're all dry, I'm going to have a play around and just see how all the pieces are going to fit together before I start doing my blended background. So I'm just sort of playing around with the placement of the trees and the snowbanks and the frames, just so I can see how it's all going to look. And then I'll go back and glue all the trees onto the snowbanks, which will then be glued to the frames. Now that I've got the frames complete with the snow slopes and the trees, I'm going to put them aside just to dry a little, and I'm going to go on with the blended background that's going to have the sleigh. Now, I had a couple of issues with some parts of the card that are coming up. The first one is doing the background and where I was to stamp the sleigh on, so I've kept it in the video just so that you can see how I go about fixing it, and then a bit later on I have some issues with some foam tape, but some of that I'll cut out, but I'll tell you about that when I get there. So I'm going to start off by taping the top and the bottom of my Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock that I'm going to do the blending on, just so that I don't have to keep holding it while I'm doing the blending. And I'm just going to pop the two frames on just very quickly, just so that I can see roughly where I'm going to be doing the background on the piece of card. I've also got a circle mask out of Inkadoo masking paper that I've going to use for the moon, so I'm going to work out whereabouts I want the moon, because that's where the sleigh, when I stamp it, is going to be across. And then I'm going to start doing the blending using Chip Sapphire, Dusty Concord and Blueprint Sketch inks, distress inks, with my mini blending tool. This Strathmore paper just blends beautifully, so I just keep layering the colours, making sure I blend where the two colours intersect. I'm actually going to keep the blending not too dark, because I want the sleigh to be able to be seen. If I went really dark like a night sky, you wouldn't see it properly, so I'm just going to keep it to look like dusk. Now I'm happy with how dark that blending is. It will look a little bit darker once I put the white trees against it, so I don't want to go any darker than that, and the stamping should stand out quite well against that. So I can take it off the board and clean the board up and get rid of that. And now I'm ready to do the stamping. The sleigh is out of the same set as I did the trees for a card just before I started the Christmas series. It was a masculine card. And so I'm going to use the sleigh out of that set. I'm going to stamp it with VersaFine Onyx Black ink and then clear embossing powder over that. Now I did do quite a few stamps and I used the Misty just so that I could restamp it until it was nice and dark. And now I'm going to do the sentiment, which is out of the snowflake set that I've used a couple of times in this series. It just says Christmas wishes. It's rather simple and nice, so I'm going to use that sentiment, and while I've got the Misty out, I'll just stamp that on a scrap piece of card. Now this is where I made the mistake. I didn't position the square die very well, cut it out, and then when I placed the frames on top, it's ended up being too high. So what I've ended up doing is just lowering it down. I've got the width of the frame to play with, lowering it down a little bit, and then I just had to cut a bit off the bottom. You'd never know once it's all put together. Thank goodness. Now this is where I had another problem. I wanted to use some foam tape between the layers, but I didn't want it to be too thick and bulky, so I remembered I had this really thin foam tape that's only about 2mm thick, but what I hadn't remembered was that it's really awful and sticky and really hard to use. So I started at first trying to cut it down the length, but it stuck to my scissors, and then it stuck to my fingers when I was trying to get it off the scissors, and it was a nightmare. So I'll cut out most of the bits where I struggled with it, and you'll see that I've got little bits of foam tape in behind the trees and things, but that's the best I could do with this tape. It was awful. Finally, I think I've got enough of the tape on to hold the different pieces together, so now I've just got to peel off all the backing and put the wider frame down onto the blended background first, and then the narrower frame on top. Oh dear, that last part became a bit of a comedy act. Oh, such a struggle with this card. I almost threw it in the bin. Anyway, I got there, and now I just need to stick the back onto the card base with double-sided tape. I've cut the sentiment out as a banner, and that will go on just at the bottom of the frame, just slightly over this last snowbank, and that's the card finished. I'm so sorry that card ended up being such a long saga. Don't feel guilty if you've skipped through parts of it. It ended up being very long. Thank you for your patience. So that's the card finished, and the last card in my 2017 series. I wanted to thank everybody that stuck with me through the year. My channel's grown in leaps and bounds this year, and I'm so grateful to every single one of you for all the comments and the thumbs up and all the things you've done through the year. You're a wonderful set of people, and I really appreciate all the love and support that you've given me through the year. I'll have a little bit of a break now for Christmas, and see you back in the new year with some Valentine's cards. So thank you very much. I'll see you next year. Have a good Christmas. Bye for now.